very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here to speak with you today, and it's an honor to be speaking along with Chief Sharleen Gale, Chair of the First Nations Major Projects Coalition with Fort Nelson First Nation. It's an important conference topic that we have before us today, because we have to get to a place where we move beyond just recognizing that climate change is real and human activity is contributing to the changing of the climates. We have to go beyond that, and we have to start coming up with pragmatic solutions that are going to help us in our goal to decarbonize. And I'd like to say that that's one of the areas that we differ on some other approaches is we know that while there are progressive politicians that want to get a hero medal for being the first to get to net zero, we know that doesn't work. It's something that we have to do together. We have to be methodical. We have to be pragmatic, and we have to move forward without harming Albertans and Canadians. Because if we get to net zero, but we have increased costs to the point that it's a detriment to Albertans and Canadians, and if we've done it with reduced reliability because people are freezing in the dark, then we haven't accomplished our goals at all. So we have a very balanced, very pragmatic approach to achieving our climate goals. We believe that the answer is through collaboration. All levels of government have to become aligned in this. The provinces, the municipalities, and the feds, we all have to work together in our goal to moving towards a cleaner energy future in a way that is practical and of course achievable. Now, I want to talk about some of the collaboration that we support. But before I do that, I just want to talk about some things that Alberta is already doing, because I believe that our pragmatic approach to cleaner energy and to decarbonizing, I believe that it's working. And I believe that we have the results to show it. And one of those examples is our fast growing renewable power energy industry. Since we came to government in 2019, we've seen $3.1 billion in renewable energy projects that have been announced. They're either been constructed or they're still under various levels of construction, and that translates into 50 new generation projects, 4,000 megawatts of power, and the bulk of that power is renewable. And we're very proud of that, because the Canadian Energy Regulator actually said that we have the fastest growing renewable power in the country, and we're proud of that. And the best part is we did it without any taxpayer subsidies. And that's important. We have a market-based approach without any subsidies. If anybody tells you that you have to subsidize renewable energy through the taxpayer, tell them to look at Alberta. Not only do we not do that, but if you were to speak to the renewable power companies that are doing business in Alberta today, they would tell you they don't want subsidies. They don't want a market where government picks winners or losers. They want a market-based approach where everybody's on the same playing field. And I would suggest that our approach is working. The fact that we are leading in Canada in renewable energy growth. And so we're obviously very proud of that. We have also been moving forward with our coal to gas conversions at a breakneck speed. We have reduced emissions from coal power generation from 44 megatons to 25 megatons. And industry will actually have been completed their coal to gas conversions by 2023, a full 7 years ahead of the time frame the government asked them to do it by. And so it's just another example of industry leading the way. I'll be frank, I think there are very few things that government does better than business. And I think that this is demonstrating that by the fact that our power generators are going to convert from coal to gas 7 years before faster than government told them to do it. So it's certainly very exciting. Another example of industry stepping up is the oil sands. The oil sands has committed to net zero by 2050. And we're very excited about that, because this wasn't government telling them that they had to be there. This was industry. Because remember, industry is made up of parents and grandparents, and we have kids and grandkids, and we want clean air and clean water too. And so this is industry that said they're going to get to net zero, and they're working on their plans to make that happen. So we're very proud of what happens when government gets out of the way of business. We've also made incredible progress on methane emissions. And the methane emissions that we have, or the reductions rather, is since 2014, we've reduced methane emissions by 34%. And by 2025, we will have reduced methane emissions by 45%. And so this is actually translating into us having the cleanest natural gas in the world. And so we think that we have made incredible progress on decarbonizing and moving towards a cleaner energy future. And it's an innovative spirit that is turning us into not just an energy powerhouse, but a clean energy powerhouse. And nowhere is that more obvious than on hydrogen. We know that hydrogen is an incredible opportunity to decarbonize hard to abate sectors. And so we released the hydrogen roadmap, which is about how we're going to do that, how we're going to use hydrogen for residential, commercial heating, for industry, for also for transportation as well. And I can say in the last 6 weeks, I've gone for 2 test drives in hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, and they're incredible vehicles. One was a long haul transport truck. The other was a passenger vehicle. And so while EVs do not have the scalability because of the electricity transmission that has to be upgraded at great cost, hydrogen fuel cells, which are EVs, they do offer scalability. And so we're very excited about that opportunity, and that Alberta is going to be at the forefront of hydrogen, not just by producing hydrogen for domestic use, but by exporting it well. And so in the last 14 months, we have seen 7 world-scale hydrogen facilities announced that are going to be built in Alberta. These are clean hydrogen energy facilities. We're very excited about that. We are forecasting by 2030 that our hydrogen ambitions will translate into a 14 megaton reduction in emissions. So we're very excited about that. Another area that we have an opportunity to contribute to a clean energy future is LNG. Now, this is a very competitive field. But we have, as I mentioned, we have the cleanest natural gas in the world, partially because of the improvements that we have made in the rogue methane emission reductions. But also, when you get our natural gas to the coast for the liquefaction process, will be powered by hydroelectricity, as opposed to using thermal energy for that liquefaction process. So that will contribute to us having the cleanest natural gas in the world. And I would suggest to you that the very last drop of LNG that is consumed on this planet should come from Alberta, because it is the cleanest, and we will always be on the forefront. So it'll continue to be the cleanest natural gas in the world. And so we're very excited about the opportunity to not just decarbonize in Canada, but to collaborate with the rest of the world by getting our natural gas and our LNG to global markets to help them decarbonize. Another important area are SMRs. We are also working with Saskatchewan, Ontario, and New Brunswick to explore emerging small-scale nuclear power technology that could lower emissions and diversify the province's energy sector. Through our work with our provincial partners, Alberta can stay informed on the latest developments and ensure the appropriate regulatory framework is in place, and should private industry pursue this promising technology. Now, while we ensure there is regulatory certainty and an attractive investment environment for these emerging technologies, we also recognize the need for enhanced electrification, distributed energy resources, and non-wired technologies to grow our grid's capabilities. Electricity is managed very differently across Canada, and we remain deeply concerned with both the jurisdictional overreach as well as the implications on reliability and affordability in the federal government's clean electricity standard work. Alberta operates an energy-only electricity market. Utility companies can only charge consumers for the power they use. Any further costs, including those for the development of infrastructure, is subject to review and approval by the independent system regulator. We do not subsidize power generation. These investments are determined by what the market will support. And as I mentioned before, our market-based approach is working. But there are legitimate concerns about the enormous cost of transmission infrastructure needed to enable a widespread push for electrification, especially since these costs are borne by Alberta ratepayers on their monthly bills. To be frank, the level of support committed from the federal government for grid modernization is nowhere near enough to take the burden off Alberta ratepayers, much less the whole country. I believe that the amount that they have put forward is $600 million for the entire country to upgrade transmission, and that is simply nothing more than a drop in the bucket. This particular issue remains to be one of the biggest question marks whenever we discuss the path forward for a net zero grid. Amidst the uncertainty created by the Clean Energy Standard, Alberta has been working on modernizing our transmission regulations to ensure our system is utilized to its full potential as new technologies are added on. We need Ottawa to come to the table with reasonable, properly funded targets to reduce emissions and protect our economy. This includes recognizing Alberta's unique electricity market and the affordability issues related to decarbonizing our natural gas-fired electricity. Part of the reason that we are also seeing affordability issues to this extent is the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has caused prices to rise sharply and natural gas supplies to become scarce. We know Canadian oil and gas will continue to be crucial to maintain affordability and reliability. And we simply are not at a point where they can be realistically be phased out at any time soon without widespread repercussions in Canada and around the globe. All credible energy forecasts show that oil and gas is going to stay high in demand until about 2040. In light of the geopolitical market tightness that we don't see easing anytime soon, and in light of the enormous progress made to clean up and diversify our natural gas supply chains, I'm left asking why any logical Canadian demonizes this industry. The emissions reductions from switching Asian countries from coal baseload power to natural gas is enormous. Increasing this supply will also reduce price volatility. With carbon capture technology, Alberta-made hydrogen can be an ultra-low carbon option that can feed both local and international markets, competing on cost with other less environmentally conscious regions. Alberta is particularly well suited to be a leader in this field. We have over a 200-year supply of natural gas at current production levels. Our geology is ideal for carbon capture, and we have a well-established industry with decades of experience as leaders in the international energy sector. Other parts of the world consider natural gas a clean power source when paired with CCUS, and it's about time Canadian leaders and everyday Canadians also followed suit. Alberta is ready to diversify our natural gas industry, and we've identified 5 key drivers for long-term growth in our natural gas strategy and vision. I mentioned hydrogen and LNG earlier, but it also includes petrochemical, plastics, recycling, and industrial demand. I'm happy to say that since we launched the vision and strategy, we've seen significant movement in many of these areas. Most importantly, much of this activity has been led by the private sector, showing that these growth opportunities aren't just government aspirations, but are supported by fundamental market forces that will contribute positively to our economy and the environment. So how do we move forward collaboratively? How do we get to the low emissions future that benefits all Canadians? A first obvious point is the meaningful Indigenous partnerships in this sector that have been lacking for far too long. Indigenous consultation and participation are foundational to developing many energy resources. But for too long, various treaty terms made it difficult for these communities to finance large projects and participate in this sector. Now in its 3rd year operating, the Alberta Indigenous Opportunity Corporation has pledged $1 billion in loan guarantees to Indigenous investors in resource development. Our first loan was an 800 megawatt, highly efficient dual cycle natural gas electricity plant. And we are now seeing significant interest in projects using other low carbon technologies. The UCP government, when elected, ran on a promise of bettering the lives of Indigenous and Albertans, both socially and economically. And what I'm seeing today is significant First Nation ownership for new projects in Alberta. These investments are creating long-term revenues for these communities, bolstering their operational capacity moving forward. Other provinces are taking note of the success of the AIOC as it creates more and more Indigenous partnerships in prosperity. Another area where increased collaboration could have a profoundly positive impact is on Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy. As I mentioned earlier, we had returned from Japan and South Korea, and we heard from trade officials the need for a better coordinated investment attraction strategy in this region. This includes a plan for how Canada as a whole can responsibly develop our hydrogen export potential and get as much ultra clean hydrogen or hydrogen carrying products to these Asian markets as possible. This will require a Team Canada approach with an economic and environmental prize too large to let pass. Outlined in the Alberta Hydrogen Roadmap, which we released last November, the global hydrogen opportunity is estimated to be $2.5 to $11 trillion industry worldwide. Businesses in regions like Japan and Korea will be required to import enormous amounts of hydrogen or ammonia, far more than our production capacity, which also happens to be enormous, to achieve the region's ambitious decarbonization goals. I was pleased to see last week that our Federal Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister Jolly, announced a new Indo-Pacific Strategy Working Group. This working group will hopefully align with the strategic investments Alberta has already made to grow our clean hydrogen potential with the rest of the nation's economic interests. Alberta stands ready to contribute our expertise on sustainable energy development and historic track record as an energy exporter to bolster the efforts of this group, just as we lent our expertise to the development of the federal clean hydrogen strategy. Canadian-made hydrogen will allow our economy to flourish as we decarbonize the world. But the window to attract world-scale facilities is happening right now. And if we miss this opportunity, regions like Australia, Qatar, and the UAE will seize most of this prize. I have faith that with conferences like this one and thought leaders like Dr. Gettinger at the helm, we will be able to find a suitable path to reduce emissions and protect the well-being of Canadians at the same time. Alberta is fully committed to a low carbon future, and we are well suited to lead these efforts at home and by being a preferred supplier of clean energy products abroad. We have all of the elements in place to build a stronger, more diverse economy, a future-proof energy sector, and a cleaner, lower emission energy future through realistic means. We will continue to advocate for and seek opportunities for our traditional energy resources as we support the responsible development of new and emerging energy sources. I'd like to thank you for your time today, and I hope your time at the Positive Energy Conference has been thought-provoking. We need your ideas to solve these problems, and I thank each of you for devoting your time to this undeniably important challenge. So thank you again for having me, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Minister Nally. Really appreciate your running us through all of the activities in terms of emissions reductions and sustainability in Alberta. I think for a lot of folks in the audience, there was probably quite a bit of new information in there. That's always really useful. And I did just want to share with you, we had a great presentation from Nick Nanos with some fresh numbers over the lunch hour. And, you know, the comment that you raised around Canada's oil and gas exports displacing higher emitting forms of energy elsewhere. That's actually something that we saw in this latest round of polling that Canadians are very supportive of, a strong majority of Canadians supportive of. So we'll make sure you get those polling results so you can have a look at them for yourselves. Wanted to just ask a question, and then we'll throw it open to the audience. Really, really appreciated the theme of collaboration in your remarks, Minister. I think that's something that's coming through over the course of our sessions here today as being so extremely important for Canada on the road to net zero. I wanted to get, you know, a bit of a sense from you how collaboration intergovernmentally with Indigenous communities, how that would play out, you know, specifically in the area of hydrogen. I know hydrogen is just, as you mentioned, such an extremely important area for Alberta with the natural gas vision and the natural gas strategy. Just would be quite interested to hear from you what that might look like, and you know, what would be the role of various players.
I appreciate that question. And one of the things that I said early on in my speech was that we think that government rarely does things better. And for that reason, we need to collaborate. And our hydrogen roadmap was a one-year-long collaboration. We collaborated with industry leaders. We collaborated with academics. We collaborated with municipalities. We worked with the federal government on their hydrogen roadmap. We collaborated with Indigenous communities and organizations as well. And so all of that work translated into the hydrogen roadmap, which I can tell you has been very well received by other levels of government, by industry, and it's been well received globally. The world is taking notice of our hydrogen ambitions because of the success of that roadmap. And I believe that because we brought all that intellectual capital to the table, we brought all those experiences of other organizations and levels of government to the table, that helped us essentially build a better roadmap. And it's what is attracting global investors today. And we were in Asia a couple of weeks ago, and I can tell you that Asia, particularly Japan and Korea, has an insatiable appetite for our clean hydrogen.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'll open it up to the room now to see if we've got any questions in the room. If not, I'm just going to keep firing away, if that's all right with you. Oh, we've got one here coming from the back. I think it's from our online audience. As you know, Minister, this is a hybrid event. Please go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, that's right. It's a virtual participant who is asking, what is Alberta's definition of clean hydrogen? Is this hydrogen produced from oil sands or natural gas resources? Is this hydrogen with CCS, which is called blue, or are you talking about green hydrogen produced in Alberta? Thank you.
Thank you for that question, and I appreciate it more than you know. This is a great question because right now we have a world that is getting in one of two camps. They're in the green camp because it's got the label green on it, or they're in the blue camp because they've got carbon capture, utilization, and storage technology. And we think that we have to step away from those labels because the labels are deceiving. There are examples of clean hydrogen that is made from natural gas. When you look at the full life cycle of hydrogen. And so for that reason, I don't think we can just classify hydrogen as a color. And by the way, there's not just green and blue anymore. There's crystal and turquoise, and it's hard to keep track. And I know the European Union has really embraced green, and I think we have to encourage in jurisdictions to get away from those labels and embrace the cleanliness of and the low carbon nature of hydrogen. I don't have a number for you. I know that there are examples of hydrogen that is made from natural gas with steam methane reforming that is 95% of the carbon is captured through CCOS. I know with autothermal reforming, it's able to capture 95% of the carbon. And there's even newer technologies that I won't get into now because I would do them disservice, but they even capture more than 98%, or sorry, more than 95% of the carbon. So you know what, I don't have an answer for you in terms of what is the definition of ultra clean carbon. I think that we have to find a definition. And we have to agree on it, and with some global standards. And it can't be about the color, because the color isn't the answer, because there are every color has different examples of carbon intensity. So I think that your question is a great one. We need to make the conversation about carbon intensity. And maybe we start off with 80%, keep the bar low. If we're able to produce hydrogen where 80% of the carbon is captured, that would be a phenomenal step forward. Then let's raise the bar to 90. Let's go to 95. Let's go to 98. And so, but this is a larger conversation that we have to have. And so we need to make it about carbon intensity, because ultimately that's what matters the most.
Great, thank you. Another question coming here from in the room.
Yes, thank you, Minister, for your remarks. Quick questions on the interconnectedness of energy systems. So you mentioned, I guess, the gas connections with BC, which your government sees as important. What about other energy systems? Suppose electricity, for example. Where does your government stand on that? Thank you.
Yeah, you know, that's a great question, because we are fiscal conservatives. That means we support free trade. We believe in energy corridors. And we need to help our provincial partners get the resources to market. And we believe that first and foremost. So our default position is to support what you just said. The challenge that we have with electricity is, while all those things are true, with electricity, we have the only open and free market in the country. And so because we have the only open and free market, the impacts to those interconnections would potentially disproportionately impact Albertans. And so, for example, if we were to create an intertie to a jurisdiction that imported Alberta energy, taking large quantities of our electricity off the market for Albertans, that could potentially raise prices. So there's not an easy answer. I'm not saying that we don't support it. I'm just saying that it has to be managed carefully. We have the Alberta Electrical System Operator that manages the electricity grid, and they look at those interconnectivities. We have a connection into Saskatchewan, BC, Montana right now, and there are groups that want us to expand those connections, and those are the things that are addressed by the AESO. Government doesn't make those decisions because the unintended consequences can be so dire. So
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, I couldn't answer that any clearer. I couldn't say yes or no to that question, so I'm sorry.
I thought that was a great answer, though, in terms of particularly the energy only, or the electricity market in Alberta. It's not well known, I don't think, outside of the province, that your system functions in a fairly unique way compared to many of the jurisdictions here in Canada. So appreciate the details.
And if I can expand on that, and what's great is that we're seeing a period of high pricing in electricity right now. So that is the market signal for generation to come online. And as I mentioned, we've got 50 projects since 2019 at various levels of construction. And that is the market working. And that generation will come online, driving prices down over the long term. And so, yeah, we're very proud of our electricity market.
One final question here from the room.
Thanks. Thanks, Minister. My question is about hydrogen. The word industrial policy is becoming more and more popular. It's having a moment, not only in Canada. In a panel some minutes ago, someone was speaking about business-state relations in the United States and in Canada. I would like to know, thinking of Alberta in the sense that it has had episodes of industrial policy, I think, what do you see that is new in the way government and businesses are collaborating around carbon capture and hydrogen?
Well, I would say what is new is how we are collaborating on decarbonization. That's what is new, is we recognize that it's important to decarbonize. And you know, we can wait to 2050 and do it all at once, or we can start now and be pragmatic and do it right. And so I see industry and government at all levels working together for the first time. There is this impression of industry that it is make money at all costs. And I can tell you that is not what I see. As the Associate Minister of Natural Gas, Electricity, and in my engagement with energy companies, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing executives of these companies, I'm seeing shareholders. They want clean air and clean water just like you and I do. And so they want to find a way to responsibly make money in a manner that respects the environment. And so that is why it was the oil sands that declared their net zero ambitions and their plans to get there. Without government telling them they have to do it, they decided on their own they were going to do it. And then that involves a bigger conversation with, you know, what can government do? And then we start having conversations about carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And, you know, the federal government came up with a tax incentive as an incentive for companies that were going to explore carbon capture, utilization, and storage technology. And we think that is a right step forward. And there's still more work that has to be done, but we think that was a good step forward, an example of collaboration. So that's the biggest thing that I see, is that people are working together better than they ever have before at all levels. Great.
Thank you, Minister. I think I can speak on behalf of everyone how much we appreciate the time that you've given us and your willingness to respond to questions and to share your perspectives and views with us from Alberta. Tremendously appreciated. So I'd like to invite everyone to join me in thanking Minister Nally.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It was my pleasure to be here.
Thank you again. Bye for now.
Bye now.
So we're going to move directly into our following keynote speech, which the minister alluded to from Chief Sharleen Gale, who is chair of the First Nations Major Projects Coalition. She's also chief of the Fort Nelson First Nation. I cannot tell you how pleased I was when we extended an invitation to Chief Gale to deliver a keynote at this conference, and she agreed. The FNNPC and the work that Chief Gale has been doing as its chair is truly nothing short of groundbreaking. For those who don't know the FNMPC, get to know the FNMPC. This is a phenomenal organization. The coalition has gone from an idea to what I think of as a movement over the course of just a few short years, and lots of work being done at the coalition to support First Nations communities across the country who want to take an active part and leadership positions in major projects. So without further ado, you all have in your bios Chief Gale's bio, so I won't take away from her time to share her perspectives with us. Chief Gale, the floor is yours. We're delighted to have you today.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So today I'm going to be speaking about the road to net zero goes through Indigenous territories. And it's a real pleasure to be speaking to you at the Positive Energy Conference. So today I'm speaking to you from Toronto, which is located on the territories of the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee and Wadat people. I wish I could be with you all in person today. However, I have to note that my team member, Jesse McCormick, the Coalition Director of Research and Legal Affairs, is there in person representing us. So please connect with him if you have an opportunity. My name is Sharleen Gale. I'm Chief of the Fort Nelson First Nation in Treaty 8, which is on the northeast corner of British Columbia. I also have the privilege of serving as the chair of the First Nation Major Projects Coalition, and it's that capacity that I'll be speaking with you today. So this has been a great conference so far, and I'm excited to see the agenda address some real world challenges of the energy transition, the roadmap, or as Monica has described it, moving from the what to the how, because that's the space the coalition is in. And we're very much focused on supporting First Nations to actually develop the energy infrastructure that we need to move to net zero. And we've been pretty successful in that regard. It's been a lot of work and we've overcome a lot of challenges. So for those of you that aren't familiar with our organization, the First Nation Major Projects Coalition is an initiative that started with 11 nations and now includes 85 nations and 7 provinces and territories. We're working on a project portfolio with capital over 17 billion. All of those projects involve equity position for a First Nation partner. And our main goal is to enhance the economic well-being of our members by supporting informed business decisions in major resource and infrastructure projects. We only started in 2017, so we've grown at a tremendous pace, but it shows what can be done when we have common goals, adequate capacity, and the willingness to do big things. And that's what will be required to achieve net zero by 2050. It can be daunting to think about what's needed to get to net zero. We will require up to 14 times more vehicle battery minerals like nickel, lithium, cobalt, and other rare minerals. Trillions of dollars for new clean energy projects and related infrastructure like clean power generation and transmission lines, new sustainable finance standards, practices, and tools to fund the energy transition, mining and related infrastructure, and new continent-wide coordinated energy policies and regulations. And even though the energy transition is well underway, it's not happening fast enough to meet the 2030 and 2050 global emission targets. So we need to find ways to accelerate. One element I want to discuss with you today that can be really a make or break the speed of the progress or process for the approval and development of these projects is Indigenous consent and engagement. One thing almost every low carbon energy project has in common, be it battery minerals, transmission lines, wind, solar, hydro, or geothermal, is it will take place on Indigenous territories. Canadian energy projects that are not compliant with the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People will be non-starters for Indigenous leaders, nations, and their members. We expect free, prior, informed consent, but we are also looking for equity ownerships for new projects on our lands and our waters. For many people, this is seen as a challenge or a barrier to a new investment. But at the coalition, I think we're showing that this is an opportunity and actually a strategy for smarter, smoother, and better transition that meets not only decarbonization goals, but reconciliation ones as well. When Indigenous nations are involved as partners on energy projects, there's no really better demonstration of consent. And I think in the future, we'll see projects that have Indigenous partnerships be accelerated. There'll be steps in the regulatory process that can be skipped because the consultation and the impacts will already be addressed through our engagement. And I know this might raise some eyebrows, but we're seeing this already in New Zealand and Australia taking place. So I know it can be done. And the ability of First Nations to partner to be equity owners in energy projects is not a hypothetical thing either. I know there's an idea in some parts of Canada that Indigenous people are opposed to development and are blocking progress, but that's not the case. We're just opposed to being left out. And now we're seeing actual projects where our member First Nations are involved in the governance of those projects. They sit at the boardroom table and have influence in decision-making now and into the future. So that's really something that's new for First Nations. And it means that we can make sure the environmental side, the impacts on our lands are addressed, but also share in the long-term financial benefit of the project. All of us want to see a healthy environment and respect for the land to ensure that the people and the animals and all living things can survive and thrive. If industry and First Nations and government can work constructively together, and there are a growing list of examples showing that we can, then I think we're positioned to supply energy in the most environmentally and socially responsible way possible. And a lot of First Nations want to be a part of that. In my opinion, net zero is a huge opportunity not only to address climate change, but to ensure Indigenous rights and benefits are finally at the forefront of new development. And we're already seeing what that can look like. According to Indigenous Clean Energy, there was over 2,000 Indigenous clean energy projects across Canada in 2019. Almost 200 were medium to large size projects, meaning that they produced at least 1 megawatt. Here are just a few examples of clean energy projects with Indigenous owners and leadership that you might not even be aware of. The Oneida Energy Storage Project in Ontario with 6 nations of the Grand River Development Corporation, which will produce 250 megawatt, will help Ontario reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 4.1 million tons. The Watay-Nakiniap transmission line in Northern Ontario, a collaboration between 24 First Nations that will build up to 1,800 kilometers of line to get to 18 remote communities off diesel. The Deerhorn project in British Columbia between the Indigenous-owned Siona Metals and the First Tellurium, which will produce tellurium, a critical metal for solar panels and solid-state lithium tellurium batteries. It's taking a small mine approach and is driven by Indigenous support, and it's a really interesting case. The Nanacook Solar Project in Ontario, that is a 15% owned by the 6 Nations Development Corp and the Mississauga of the Credit, will produce 44 megawatts of clean energy. And the Hen Bay Inlet First Nation Wind Energy Center, also in Ontario, that is a 51% Indigenous owned and will produce 300 megawatt. The MOU between 3 Saskatchewan Indigenous companies, Kitsaki Management, Athabasca Basin Development, and Disnetti Group to explore Indigenous ownership in a small modular nuclear reactor. And the Frog Lake First Nation power plant in Alberta, which includes a cutting edge carbon capture technology. I could literally provide millions of hundreds of examples of Indigenous projects that are leading us to net zero. But maybe it just makes a little bit more sense to tell you about my own nation's clean energy project, the Tudeka geothermal project. This is a 91 million, 7 megawatt geothermal electricity generation plant that will provide energy for the equivalent of 1,400 households. And it's actually adjacent to our reserve and will supply clean, renewable base load electricity to the BC grid. We officially announced it last October after securing a large federal government commitment, and construction is to begin in 2024. This marks one more milestone in Fort Nelson's journey to assert our inherent right and build an economic base that will help us be financially independent. I champion this project because I believe it will create clean energy, good jobs, and livelihood for our people, and provide more opportunity for our youth. But the economic impact will go far beyond Fort Nelson. It's an opportunity for our entire Northern Rockies region. And we estimate there will be 10,000 workdays for well field development and related services, and 4,000 workdays for plant construction, including electricians, welders, pipe fitters, insulators, and mechanics. So this is a real big job creator, and we're proud that we have attracted this kind of investment in our region. I've learned in the past years how critical partnerships are to how important they are to attracting good projects, making sure they have social license and getting them approved and built. And our First Nation communities are so open to that. We need you, the private sector, to be interested and comfortable with Indigenous-led projects. If we want to be out in the front of this energy transition, we need to leverage the expertise and the capacity that good partners bring. And Indigenous partners are taking on more equity in these projects. On average, Indigenous communities own 45% share of the projects they're involved in. And that's a huge difference from a decade ago. We've seen that Indigenous partnerships lead to better environmental standards and alignment with traditional cultural values. It leads to own source revenue for Indigenous communities, which can be invested in the community's priorities. It leads to employment, with Indigenous communities benefiting from job opportunities during the construction and operation phases. And it leads to greater self-determination because economic participation affirms our Indigenous rights. So there is a wide range of reasons why communities have become more interested and engaged in clean energy projects. But they don't just happen. There's a lot of capital to explore and implement. Of course, our nations have historically had barriers to participating in resource development due to lack of capital, because we were stripped of our wealth. And that's why it makes it so hard for us now to provide the equity we need to be partners and to reduce the risk and therefore the cost of borrowing. It is my belief and the position of the First Nation Major Projects Coalition that we need a national green energy loan guarantee program. There are already models out there, such as the Ontario Loan Guarantee Program and the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. And there has been great work done by Raven Indigenous Capital Partners and the First Nation Financial Management Board. But all this does not meet the demand. Indigenous people are ready and willing to be partners in clean energy projects. Industry wants to work with our nations. There is a demand for products and materials available on our territories, and they can help address the challenge of both the current energy and the ongoing climate crisis. The bottleneck is access to capital. On the flip side, because the Major Projects Coalition is all about solutions, this presents an opportunity to change the financing system in Canada with Indigenous people leading the transformation. If the problem is access to capital, then the solution is to change the financing system in Canada with Indigenous people leading the transformation. And ESG is a key opportunity to advance Indigenous rights and build sustainable projects. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it, but ESG means environmental, social, and governance, and it represents the monetary element that a lot of investors look at when deciding to where to put their money. It's not just something that, we're looking at, but we have to do. Focusing on these factors decreases the risk for investment too. And it's good for business and it's good for society. The Major Projects Coalition has developed deep expertise in this area. We've had a really successful ESG conference in March last year, and we released a major report on the topic last June, a roadmap to investing in Canada. We are positioned to provide thought leadership, improving the financial tools available to Indigenous people to allow us to lead the transition to net zero. For me, there's no better path forward for achieving our environmental, political, and economic goals. No one said this transition would be easy, but we are moving the needle, and all of us here are doing the hard work. And it's so important that we have these conversations about the how. And I'm heartened that the role of Indigenous people is not being taken for granted or ignored, but has really been at the forefront of these conversations. And I thank Monica and all the organizers for including our perspective and experiences in your conference today. So with that, I think we have some time for some questions, and I'd be happy to answer. So thank you, hi, and masicho.
Thank you so much, Chief Gale. The people are already wanting to clap. Just so you know, for every panel and speaker today, I've had to, we've asked people to join us in thanking them for you. The claps just came spontaneously. So you can get a sense of how much your remarks were appreciated by the people in the room. I suspect there are probably questions in the audience. Maybe I'll just kick it off with one from me. I've always really appreciated the solution focused approach of the coalition, and something that you mentioned in your remarks. And you put, a couple of ideas, well, more than a couple of ideas, but two ideas on the table that I thought were really interesting. One, the idea of a national green energy loan program. And then the second, the idea of Indigenous projects where there are Indigenous partnerships that they could be accelerated in project approval processes, regulatory processes. And I'd like to, if you could, maybe just expand, on one or both of those. I'd be particularly interested in the second one around accelerating permitting processes where there's an Indigenous partnership. Any thoughts you could share with us on that would be, I think, really valuable for our conference today.
So our members of the First Nation Major Projects Coalition want a future where we're all planning this transition in a collaborative development approach. In Canada, and any future development will, whether it's hydrocarbon or non-hydrocarbon activity, will impact Indigenous lands. And so whatever future planning that is being undertaken needs to be consistent with this new reality of having Indigenous inclusion and co-development. Our market-based energy system is reliant on capital investment, and we must be thinking of ways to curb capital flight and make our sector more attractive to the investment community. So our members, they want smart development. They want to be involved right at the forefront. They want to be involved in building upon strong business cases. And, they also don't want to have problems attracting investment, and looking for people that really want to incorporate the I in ESG to have that huge impact when we're building infrastructure projects. But I'm just thinking about one of the projects that we're working with our members in Ontario is we helped one of our members negotiate a 50% equity interest in the Chatham to Lakeshore transmission line project. So for any projects going forward, there'll be 50% equity to our member nations. And I think this is a precedent-setting deal between Indigenous groups and the private sector. And it shows that this can be done. And, we need to be able to attract that capital necessary to build these infrastructure projects if we're all going to reach net zero by 2030, 2050. I mean, this is our new reality, and we all must come together to make this happen.
Great. Thank you so much. So I'll turn it to questions in the room, or if we have anybody from our virtual audience who are asking questions. If not, I'm just going to keep firing away with more questions, but I want to leave some space for folks in the room as well. Yeah, we've got one at the back here.
Thank you for the great remarks. I just wanted to ask, you mentioned like maybe we need to change the way projects get financed. And I wanted to just briefly, if you can expand a little bit. Well, you're more engaged in like brainstorming or thinking about different ways that it can actually happen. If you can expand a little bit further on what you have in mind, if like as potential pathways forward.
So I think proving our access to capital isn't just a government problem. It's a problem that's been borne by all of us, and Indigenous communities, the private sector, and the government. We all have a role to play in that. So for the coalition, what we've been focusing on is improving access to capital for Indigenous investment in major projects for our members. We've been meeting with, the banking sector, with government, and, talking to the private sector about our challenges, because we all have to come together to solve this. We also been improving the business readiness of our members, First Nations, so that they can take part in opportunities within their territories, but also bring this information home to their members so that they can make informed business decisions. And I've already seen what can happen when provinces that are leading these kind of initiatives in Ontario, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, their providing financial support at low interest rates so that First Nations actually can be involved in these transactions. We had challenges with one of our projects where 11 of the First Nations went to go get financing for a pipeline project, and the interest rates were at credit card rates. So we all know that in order for us to be involved, we need the same opportunities as the business community to finance these projects at low interest rates. Yeah, and I don't know if that answers your question, but I know that we definitely need to change the financing system in Canada, and it's going to take, all of us to be working together. It would be really great if, corporate Canada would, really adopt Section 92 and work with our Indigenous communities. I don't think that, we need to be scared of the UNDRIP declaration. I mean, that's something that I look at as an opportunity. And I'd also hope that the business community would really look at adopting the I in ESG, which is the Indigenous component in that.
That's great, Chief Gale. Other questions from the audience? If not, I want to ask you one around UNDRIP. Okay, I'm just gonna charge right ahead then. So you just mentioned about, that you don't see that as something that people should be concerned about or that they should fear, that you see it as an opportunity. Love to hear you expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, I feel that the truest form of consent for a First Nation when a major project's going through their territory is having an equity position. As co-proponents, we're giving our expertise to the project. I talked about it in my speech where, a lot of the regulations could be streamlined because a lot of our issues are already been addressed. As First Nation people, it's really important when you want to build a project is to come see us at day one, because when you come see us at day one, we can tell you where and where not a project can and can't go. And I'll tell you, when the past 10 years, it was really hard for Fort Nelson First Nation when we had a boom and bust mentality with the oil and gas. And so we really know what happens when we are not meaningfully involved. We get left behind. And I find that when First Nations are involved in a project, everyone moves forward. Nobody is left behind because the project is then been able to be built from the ground up. And if that money is circulating in our communities instead of 2 times, 10 times, and then hits the municipality and then the province and then the world, it just makes sense to me to build these projects from the ground up now. And we want to focus on solutions as Indigenous people so that we could move our communities the best way forward for future generations. For the past 100 years, we've been placed on reserves and we watched your communities grow around us. And that's really challenging because we want the same opportunities. We want good housing, we want fresh water, we want nice roads for our community members and other opportunities for education, social programs that the federal dollars that we receive from the government just doesn't offset. So there's a lot of potential when it comes to First Nations actually having ownership in these projects. And I think the more that we come together and start having these difficult conversations, the more projects that you're going to be seeing built in Canada and be successful. There's a competition happening in this world right now. And if we don't get it together and start working with Indigenous inclusion, then we're going to be left behind in this transition, because First Nations will no longer allow you to access their territories without meaningful engagement and meaningful participation through equity.
Wonderful. Maybe just one final question, if I could. You mentioned a project a moment ago with 11 First Nations and a pipeline, and I think you're referring to the Coastal GasLink project. And, I know that the coalition played a very crucial role in helping to support the development of that agreement. I wonder if you could speak a little bit more on that. I had not heard what you had just shared with us around the credit card interest rates. That's pretty shocking. anything that you could, kind of share with us by way of the coalition's role? What were some of the key elements of that approach that enabled those communities to come together, and then obviously to come together as well with the proponent?
Well, I'll tell you that those deals are never easy. Negotiations always can be challenging, and we did have our differences with TC Energy. And, we've been able to build a lot of trust since then and communication. So I think that in the long run, we have been seeing success with the First Nations coming together and signing the 10% option agreement. And what a success story for those communities, because that pipeline is going to be running for decades, and benefits will be going directly to the communities that are going to be impacted. So I think by working together, we can show that regulatory approvals can be a lot smoother. You'll see project costs, development costs be a lot lower. Investment risk will be reduced. The environmental impacts will be lessened because the First Nations have more input on it. And then you'll see more Indigenous workers out there from these communities. You'll see the business owners prospering alongside, the non-Indigenous community. And, the communities will just benefit in the long run. And right from the construction phase to the operation phase of the project, where the coalition came in to be able to help was to really help the communities make an informed business decision. There was a lot of things that I learned just going through this transaction that I didn't know, you had to do at this scale. But, we facilitated meetings with government, industry, other First Nations. And I think one of the biggest points to point out is that the First Nations always didn't see eye to eye either, right? Mm-hmm. So, you really have to sit down and have these conversations and just be honest and open about like what you really desire as you move forward. Owning a pipeline, traditionally hasn't been something that we've seen in Canada. So I think this is a really great success story of what can be done again, if we all come together to work with each other. This pipeline is very, very important to Canadians, and it's also important to people around the world and British Columbians. And what a success story to say that, there's equity through the First Nations, and benefit will be coming to their communities through the long run.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing that with us, and for spending the time with us this afternoon, sharing your wisdom and your perspectives and the work of the coalition. This time I will invite everybody to join me in thanking you, Chief Gale.
Thank you. Merci.